A story from 1942 California, where war wasn't always fought with weapons. March of 1942 didn't just bring wind from the mountains. It brought an order. Tacked to the wall outside the post office in Wood Lane, California, a new yellow poster had gone up. Thick black letters that even the sun couldn't fade. Civilian Exclusion Order Number 5. It said every person of Japanese ancestry, whether immigrant or American-born, had 6 days to pack up and leave the county. 6 days to disappear. The Haradas, the Okadas, the Minoras, neighbors I'd known for years, folks we'd traded melons with and shared early frost warnings, were now sorting what they could carry and pinning numbered tags to their luggage and their children. I stood at the edge of our field, looking across the property line toward the Tsukamoto vineyard, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't explain what was happening. How could someone stop being from here just because of a name? My name's John Merrill. I was 32 at the time, worked as an agricultural inspector in Sacramento County, and ran a few acres of Thompson seedless grapes with my father and our dog, Toby. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We were like most folks back then, tired but moving. The Tsukamotos lived just past the creek. Their vineyard rows were straighter than ours. Their daughter, Keiko, could prune a vine cleaner than any man I knew. Her father, Kazuo, was a quiet man with strong hands. Always nodded when he passed, even when you hadn't said anything worth nodding to. Now they were being told to leave their land. Not sold, not rented, just left. On their last morning, I walked over with a basket of eggs and 2 jars of plum preserves. Keiko was packing books into a wooden crate. Her mother was folding clothes like they'd be worn again soon, though we all knew that wasn't guaranteed. Kazuo met me at the gate. He didn't smile. He just looked tired. Older. I offered the basket. He looked at it for a long second before taking it. "Thank you, Mr. Merrill," he said, soft but clear. Then, "Do you know anyone who might look after the vines?" His voice cracked just a bit on that last word, vines. Not house, not land. Because for a farmer, the vines are the heartbeat. I didn't answer right away. "I'll think on it," I told him. And I did. That night, I sat on the porch with a stub of pencil and my father's old ledger book. There were 2 mortgages on the Tsukamoto place. A seasonal loan from the bank. Property taxes due in July. If nobody worked the fields, the land would be seized. If it was seized, it would be auctioned. They'd come back, if they came back, to nothing. I couldn't sleep. By morning, I had my answer. I quit my job at the AG office 3 days later. I used part of my savings to pay the first installment on the Tsukamoto taxes and arranged to lease the Okada and Nita properties next door. I had no formal contract, just letters, promises, and the kind of handshake a man hopes is still worth something. Some folks call me crazy. Others call me worse. Jap lover. Someone painted on our fence in red. Someone fired a 22 into our barn one night. The sheriff told me maybe I ought to stop causing trouble. But I'd made up my mind. Every morning, I'd saddle up the tractor and make the rounds. 20 acres in the morning, 20 more after lunch. I worked alone most of the time. Couldn't afford help. Some days, Keiko's notes would help. She'd left behind hand-drawn pruning guides, soil condition notes, handwritten yield estimates in a notebook I kept in the glove box. I was careful not to touch the things in their home. I dusted the windowsills. I watered the rosebush by the porch. It felt wrong to let it all go silent. By midsummer, the vines were flowering. I sent updates to the internment camp where the Tsukamotos had been taken. I never knew exactly where it was, just a return address, Pinedale Assembly Center. No replies came for a while. Then, in August, I got a letter. The paper was thin, the writing small and neat. "Dear Mr. Merrill, my family thanks you for watching over the land. We are well, though it is hot and dusty here. I think often of the vines and the sound of water in the rows. Your kindness will not be forgotten. Keiko." I read it 3 times before folding it into my wallet. The harvest that year was hard. Too little water, too few hands. But I got it done. I sold the crop under all 3 families' names. Paid their debts. Put half the profits aside. And I kept going, not because it made sense, but because they would have done the same for me. Winter in Sacramento Valley doesn't shout. It comes slow, in the way the earth stiffens under your boots. By December, the grapevines looked like knuckles in the frost, black and twisted, but holding. I walked the rows every morning, same as always. Checked the stakes. Pulled a few weeds that thought they were smarter than winter. Watched the sky for the storms that never came. The air smelled of dry leaves and smoke. The Tsukamoto's house sat quiet. I still watered the rose bush by the porch, even though the blooms were gone. Keiko had once told me it was planted the year she was born. Same roots, she'd said. Same soil. That winter, the roots held on for both of us. The letters came less often. Keiko's last one had been in October. She said they'd been moved from Pinedale to a more permanent camp called Tule Lake. Snow in the distance. Barbed wire in every direction. Her father was sick with something he didn't talk about. Her mother had stopped smiling. I miss the vines, she wrote. I dream about walking row 8 with clippers in my hand. I wrote back, told her I'd pruned that row myself last week, and the canes were strong. I told her the soil looked good, that the well hadn't run dry, that the books were balanced and the taxes paid. I didn't tell her about the second shot that hit the barn, or the red slurs someone scratched into the Tsukamoto's mailbox, or that my father hadn't spoken a full word to me since I took over those farms. Some truths don't belong in ink. By January, I'd added the Okada and Nida orchards to my daily circuit, stone fruit and grapes both. 46 acres in total. I kept their books separate, but their stories tangled like roots underground. The bank tried to foreclose on the Okada's place. Said without a resident, the land was considered abandoned. I drove down to the county office with every receipt I had, fertilizer bills, water records, crop weights. I handed over the bundle and said, "This land is not abandoned. It's being kept warm." The clerk didn't smile, but she stamped the file. That was enough. Spring brought blossoms to the trees and fresh rumors from town. Someone said the interned families would never be allowed back. Someone else said the land would go up for public sale next year. A man in a feed store called me traitor under his breath. I let it pass. But that night, I pulled out Keiko's first letter and read it again. Your kindness will not be forgotten. I underlined that line with my thumb. In April, I hired a boy from across the valley, Manuel Cruz. 17, strong, quiet, didn't ask questions. We worked side by side through planting. Sometimes, he'd bring his little sister Maria, and she'd sit under the eaves reading books in Spanish while we ran irrigation lines. Manuel was fast, careful. One morning, I caught him walking the Tsukamoto's rows without being told. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Just learning," he said. "These vines are different. They look like they're listening." I didn't know what he meant then. Now I do. In May, I got a letter from Keiko with a pressed blossom folded inside. It was brittle and pale, like a memory held too tight. She wrote that Tule Lake had fences now and towers. Some people were getting sick. Some were getting angry. My father doesn't speak much anymore. But every time I mention the vineyard, he closes his eyes and smiles. That night, I sat in their kitchen. Just sat. The silence was loud in that house. Before I left, I dusted the photo frame by the stove, the one with Keiko, her parents, and a black mutt I'd never met. Someone had once called this place temporary, but I'd never believed that. By June, the first fruit showed on the vines. Manuel and I checked for mildew, ran drip lines, thinned leaves. The fields hummed, not loud, just enough to let you know they were breathing again. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, I found a truck parked at the gate. 2 men in suits. County assessors. They asked who I was, and I told them. They asked why I was farming abandoned land. I handed them the letters. Receipts. Copies of leases handwritten in ink that had faded from sun and time. One man skimmed the pages. The other stared at the field like it had betrayed him. "You know none of this is binding," he said. "I know what it's worth," I said. "Why are you doing this?" I didn't answer, just nodded toward the vines. He shook his head. "It's good land. could get a real buyer. It already has one. They're just delayed. He folded the papers, handed them back. Suit yourself, he muttered. In July, Keiko turned 22. I sent a box, 2 jars of plum preserves, a photo of the field in bloom, and a note that said, Row 8's still waiting on you. No answer came. Late that summer, the Tsukamoto's old dog house collapsed behind the shed. It was small, rotted, nearly forgotten. But I rebuilt it. Took a weekend, some old boards, and more nails than needed. No dog to live in it. No child to play near it. But some things you don't do because they're needed. You do them because someone else would have. The harvest came fast and full. The fruit was better than last year. Cleaner. Heavier. I paid the debts. Covered the taxes. Put half the profits into 3 separate envelopes, labeled in careful handwriting. Tsukamoto, Okada, Nida. Then I set them in a drawer. And waited. Autumn brought fewer letters. Then none. The vines went bare again. The fields went quiet again. But I stayed. Because they hadn't left by choice. And I'd promised, without ever saying the words out loud, this will still be yours. The telegram came on a Tuesday in January. Not from the camp. From the County Farm Bureau. A single line. War Relocation Authority to begin releases. Prepare for returnees. I read it twice, then folded it into the top pocket of my work shirt and went out to check the pump by the south line. The handle had worked loose again. I tightened it, tested the flow, and thought about what prepare meant when a family had been gone 3 years. I made a list that night at the kitchen table. It wasn't long. Replace glass in the Tsukamoto kitchen window. Paint the porch rail. Service the truck. Move furniture back from the storage room to the front parlor. Sweep the attic. Open the bank envelopes and balance to the penny. The next morning I started at the top. By March the vines had begun to push green again. I put in a half day on the Okada orchard and another on the Nidhi Rose, then raked gravel for the drive at the Tsukamoto place. Manuel came by after school and helped with the porch. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. When the steps were done, he ran a finger along the top rail. They'll see this first, he said. They will, I said. At the end of April, a letter arrived addressed to me in a careful, practiced hand. Postmark, Sacramento. Return address I didn't know. I stood by the mailbox a long time before opening it. Mr. Merrill, I am writing on behalf of the Tsukamoto family. We have been approved to leave Tule Lake and will travel to Sacramento in May. We expect to arrive the week of the 14th, depending on the availability of rail transport. We do not know yet where we can live initially. We are grateful for the care you have taken with the property and understand from your letters that the place may still be in order. Please do not inconvenience yourself on our account. We can make do with little. Respectfully, Keiko. I read it a second time, then a third. I put the letter back in the envelope, slipped it into my wallet next to her first letter from 1942, and went to the shed to check the spare keys. They were where I'd left them. Word travels fast in a small town and slower where people prefer it that way. By the second week of May, I had 2 conversations I'd been expecting and one I hadn't. The first was with the banker. He came to the farm with a folder under his arm and a new tone in his voice. He stood at the truck bumper and counted off the old claims. The Okada note is current, he said. The Nidhi tax arrears have been satisfied. For the Tsukamoto property, we have no grounds to proceed. I could have told you that last spring, I said, but I kept my voice even. He nodded like the weather had turned in our favor and he had predicted sun. The second conversation was with a neighbor who had stopped speaking to me in 1943. He slowed his truck by the fence, left the engine running, and set into the dust. You'll want help the day they come back. I will, I said. He touched his hat and drove on. The third conversation was with my father, who had not said a full sentence to me since I quit the inspector's job. He was sitting by the window at dusk. I told him the letter had come. I told him the date. He set his hands on the arms of the chair and pushed once, like a man getting ready to stand. He stayed seated, but he said one word I had not expected to hear again from him. Good. It sounded exact. It sounded like approval. They came on a Wednesday, just after noon. a taxi, then another behind it. The driver stepped out first and opened the back doors. Keiko climbed out in a plain dress with a hem she had mended twice. Her mother stepped out next, thinner than before, eyes quick. Then Kazuo. He wore a hat he hadn't owned the last time I saw him, and he carried a suitcase with a tag that had been written by a hand that did not know him. We stood apart for a moment. Then we didn't. Keiko bowed from the waist the way her mother did, then straightened and held out her hand. "Mr. Merrill," she said, "we are here." "You are home," I said. The words came clean. I had set the front room back the week before. Chairs at angles that matched the old photographs. A clean cloth on the table. The rosebush outside had put down 2 new buds that would open by Sunday if the weather held. We walked through the rooms together. Keiko opened drawers, not searching for anything in particular, only taking inventory. Her mother lifted a curtain with 2 fingers. Kazuo stood at the back door and looked across the yard toward the rose, then took off his hat and held it against his stomach. He did not speak for a long time. The suitcase went into a corner. The driver left. The house had 4 people in it again. We sat at the table. I set the 3 envelopes on the cloth and told them what each contained. Crop weights by year. Prices. Expenses. Taxes. I said I had kept half the profit in trust as promised and had covered shortfalls when they came. I said I would show them the ledger books and leave them with whatever questions they had. Keiko did not reach for the envelopes. She looked at me and said, "We will repay you for anything we owe." "You do not," I said. "This is yours." Kazuo set his hand on the table and tapped once. "You worked here," he said. "I kept it in order. That was the job." He looked at the window again. "The job was more," he said. "We know." He slid 1 envelope back across the table. "This is for repairs. For the fence. For what was broken and then not broken." I shook my head. He slid it closer. Keiko folded my fingers around it and did not let go for a second longer than the gesture required. "Please," she said. I counted to 3 and put the envelope in my pocket to be polite, and because refusal would turn something simple into a contest no one needed to win. There was work to do beyond ledgers and keys. The pump at the north line needed a new belt. The gate by the lane had dropped an inch. The corner post by row 8 had loosened. We set about these tasks without ceremony. Manuel came that afternoon. He stood straight and kept his eyes steady when Keiko thanked him. He shrugged and said it was no trouble, then spent the next hour resetting the corner post like he was building the first thing that would last. The next day, I stood back in the field and watched Keiko walk row 8 with clippers in her hand. She checked spurs, counted buds, trimmed back winter damage. Every motion read as practiced, correct. She set the tool down twice to pick debris from the line and push stakes firm with the sole of her shoe. At the far end of the row, she turned and saw me and lifted the clippers once in the air like a signal. I nodded. Later she said, "They told us the farm would be gone." "It wasn't," I said. She looked toward the ridge and then back at the vines. "I know." In June, the Okadas returned. In July, the Nidas. There were more empty houses in the county than there had been in 1942, and not all stories closed as cleanly. A woman I knew came back alone to a house sold out from under her by a cousin. A brother and sister returned to the wrong key and a lock that did not take it. Those days were longer than the rest. The night before the first harvest after the families came back, Kazuo walked the rows with me. He moved slower than he had before, but he knew every low spot and every place the wind liked to shift. He asked me what I had done when the pump seized the previous spring. I told him. He asked where I had bought the replacement parts when the war had made supply thin. I told him that too. At the end of the row, he set his hand on the stake and looked down the line in a way that I recognized from the years before 1942. "You did not make this yours," he said. "You made sure it could be ours again." "That's what was needed," I said. He nodded once. "Needed," he repeated, as if testing the word and finding it the right size. On the morning we brought in the first load, the picking crew gathered at the lane before dawn. Some were the same hands as years ago. Some were new. I took the far end while Keiko took the near. Manuel ran the truck. We worked without speeches. At midday, we broke for water. Keiko's mother brought out rice balls and a tin of pickled plums. She set the tin on the tailgate and said, "Take." People did. When the light went low and the last crates were strapped, we stood by the truck bed and counted the stacks. We wrote the numbers down. We checked the scale. There wasn't a cheer. There didn't need to be. The weight was its own announcement. I drove to the winery with the first load. The scale ticket printed slow. The price was fair. On the way back, I put the ticket in the glove box beside an old photograph of my father cutting canes in a year with more rain. I parked at the house and walked to the kitchen with the ticket in my hand. Keiko was at the sink. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked at the number and nodded once. "Good," she said. We stood there for a moment. Then I set the ticket on the ledger and closed the cover. I did not stop working the other two places all at once. I kept to the habit of walking each property once a week until the families had their systems set again. By autumn, they did not need me. That was the point. In October, I put the spare keys in an envelope with a note that said only, "For when you misplaced the first set." I left the envelope in the drawer by the stove where it could be found and forgotten and found again. In November, I took the envelope Kazuo had insisted I keep and spent it on a new belt for the north pump, a fresh coat of whitewash for the packing shed, and a wooden sign we set at the lane, Tsukamoto Vineyard. The letters were black and straight. Manuel painted them. Keiko's mother chose the spot. Winter came early that year. The vines held. One night in December, I walked our place in the dark. I passed the Tsukamoto house and saw a rectangle of light in the front room. Voices moved inside. Quiet conversation, then a brief laugh. I stopped at the gate, listened for a second, and then kept going. There was nothing to fix there. At home, my father sat by the window. He looked over as I came in. "You did what was right," he said. Clear. Full sentence. I stood in the doorway a second longer than needed. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. "Good. People tell stories in this valley about prices and rain and machines. They tell stories about years that were better or worse than they had a right to be. We don't have many stories about what happens when strangers keep something for you and give it back in working order. But we have this one. The fields they left behind kept growing while they were gone. Someone had to make sure the gates didn't sag and the water kept moving. That was the work. And when they were ready, the work was theirs again.